evening. Good evening. I'm Dave Lennox and want to welcome you to our first lecture in our 2016 Architecture and Landscape series. I'm the University Architect and Director of Campus Planning and Design. Last year, our lecturers explored the theme, the moment, and really it was a response to a question we had asked them: do you think there is an architecture or a landscape architecture of the moment? This year's theme is live, work, play. And we really want to focus on how design is responding to sort of the melding of how people now work and live in some of the same places, how they recreate, and be interested in seeing how that response is in our series. I'd like to thank Sarah, Padma, and Zach from our office, as well as John Barton, who's director of the Stanford Architectural Program, for their help in organizing the lecture. And again, I think we have an outstanding set of professionals this year. I'd also like to thank the American Institute of Architects, the Santa Clara Valley chapter, for helping in the advertising and in the registering our program for continuing education. And if you wish to get the credits, we have a sign up. I think it's outside of this door. So this year, we're going to be moving our venues around a bit. We've been in the Clark Center for a few years. That's under construction or renovation right now. So we'll be moving around. And next lecture is going to be Mark Jensen from Jensen Architects. That's in 2 weeks. And the venue will be at the McMurtry Building, the new art building that was opened next to the Cantor Center. So we're excited. If you've ever been to Mark's building in Healdsburg, the Shed, it's really kind of a hopping venue. And in a lot of his other work has sort of the same energy, so that should be a great lecture. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Nick Rader. Nick first worked with Snohetta in 2006, shortly after they opened their New York office, and he began his full-time career with the firm in 2007, taking on many roles and also in a wide variety of project types. He's been a lead designer for the National September 11th Museum Pavilion at the World Trade Center, and he's been the facade designer and project manager on the James B. Hunt Library at North Carolina State University. And I was telling him I visited that last year. It's a spectacular, spectacular building and a beautiful response to the site. He's currently overseeing projects such as the One Oak Tower and Plaza, the James Beard Public Market in Portland, and for those of you that love food, he's working on the French Laundry kitchen renovation and garden expansion, and he promised to get us all in there. Reservations so we're really excited about that. In 2014, Nick moved to San Francisco to open and manage Snohetta's West Coast office as the director of San Francisco operations. And as the director of the office, he is responsible for project and design oversight, business development, and in his words, I think, fun. Keeping that office fun. So please, we're excited to have him lecture here tonight. Please give a warm Stanford welcome to Nick.
Great. Is this on? We good? Thanks everyone for coming. There's a lot of people out here. I wasn't sure how many to expect, so thanks for taking your time. I gotta say, when they said the topic was live, work, play, I thought, I don't really want to talk about that. It's so cliche. Every technology company, especially in the Bay Area, is doing it. That's all anyone wants to talk about, is how much fun we should be having, which was great. So then, I thought about it a little more, and I wanted to really get a better perspective on it. And I thought, well, let's think about history a little bit. And I thought about 3.8 billion years ago was when the first single-cell prokaryote showed up. It was the first life, believe it or not. By the way, this is also the point in my lecture when I thought I've bitten off way more than I can chew and way more than I know about, so it goes downhill from here, I promise. But that's when the first life showed up, and it took almost really that same 3.8 billion years before Homo sapiens, of course, humans, showed up. And it took another 190,000 years before we came across, or invented rather, agriculture and civilization. So for basically 3.8 billion years, the only thing that existed was life, not even work. not play. You either survived or you didn't. But with the invention of agriculture and civilization, of course, the component of work was introduced into our lives. Especially as history progressed and technology was improved, like the potter's turnet or the first wheel, work really became integrated, actually, into what we were doing, how we survived, how we lived. But it was still separate from life up until about, really after the Industrial Revolution. But it was really separate from life during the Industrial Revolution because of safety, because of the focus on efficiency, and all of these other things. So now you have work and life, but you don't have play. So then by the end of the Industrial Revolution, actually production efficiency and capacity had gotten so great that now people started having free time. They started playing, believe it or not. Until this moment, it was reserved only for the elite in the world. And as it expanded and actually infiltrated, say, into the rest of us, into culture, there was even a great religious debate, because now with all this idleness, there was a lot of immorality. People were going to pubs, they were drinking, all of this sort of thing. So now you have play, but people didn't really know what to do with it, how to deal with it. It was sort of this awkward thing. And with the introduction, or the end of the Industrial Revolution, the introduction of white-collar jobs, people became more comfortable with the idea of play. By the invention of the digital computer, the invention, of course, of the first mass-market computer, people started actually talking more at work. Even white-collar jobs have become so efficient. Remember, you already have the production efficiency of the Industrial Revolution. Now you have white-collar efficiency. Life and work started melding together. Work became more about relationships, became more about communication, which was sort of interesting. And by the time the very first primitive network showed up in 1969, of course, you also had the civil rights movement, human rights movement, individual rights. And people became more and more comfortable with the idea that everyone's playing at this point in time. It was just a fact of the matter by now. And then, not so coincidentally, the same year, 1974, that the word internet was coined, Constant published his work on New Babylon. And New Babylon was based entirely on the premise that humans no longer had to produce anything. All they had to do was play. And that play was creation, demolition, recreation of their environment. It was entirely in the pursuit of happiness. All of the automation of industry just gave them things. They didn't have to pay any bills because they didn't have anything. Everything was just given to them. Of course, this was intended as an anti-capitalist critique and blah, blah, blah. I won't get into it. I'm not an academic. But really, that's what led me here today, is this idea that everyone is always just playing. It's 40 years later now that I'm standing here talking about how play is integrated into our life, into our work life, into our life, how play is integrated into play. It's a very interesting moment. So, why does this matter still? I haven't really answered that question yet. Well, if you think about it, I just walked through 3.8 billion years of life, and I went from life to life work play, to a theory that there's just play. Well, for this amount of time, essentially, the only thing we did was live. There was no other options. And then for this infinitesimally small amount of time, we worked. That was essentially yesterday, right? It's like 2 times, I don't know, I know I'm in an engineering school, it's like 2 times E minus 4 or something like that. And then play is really just today. That's why this is relevant. We're just now beginning to play. Sure, other people are doing it. Tech industry is doing it. Even medical industry is doing it, arguably, in some sectors. Those sorts of things. But it's happening today. So that's why this is relevant. So then I got really excited about this project and thought, well, how does it relate to us? I still didn't have any idea how it related to us. Well, it relates to us, Snohetta, simply because we're doing it. We're the ones having to manage this culture of, well, of course we really want to play, but we also have to impact space. It's our jobs to sort of set a framework for this dialogue and this discussion that people are starting to have. That's a very hard thing to do when we consider that our greatest project actually is Snohetta itself. We ourselves are constantly changing. We're stuck in this change. So how do we do our work then? If everything's changing, we're changing, all we have to do is play. All we want to do is play, right? How do you start a project? How do you begin? Well, the answer actually is you definitely don't begin with glass and metal or wood and concrete or anything like that. What you actually begin with is humans, and you think about our intuition and our emotion and our feelings. You think about how we communicate together. You think about how we talk to each other, and all of those sort of fuzzy, nice things. So, okay, we're thinking about humans. That means I have to go to a meeting, I have to go to a client, I have to sit with a community, and I have to talk about something. If I don't want to talk about buildings, what do I talk about? And actually, we've come up with, over the years, a number of fun little simple games that we like to bring with us. We play these with clients, with communities, with other stakeholders. Sometimes we play it internal to Snohetta. This one, for example, is an image-based game. We look at images specifically that have nothing to do with architecture, nothing to do with design. They're just images. But they're meant to evoke conversation and emotion. It's to get other people's opinions and ideas on the qualitative aspects of our project. Other games that we play, we use blocks. Sometimes the blocks represent people. Sometimes they represent building operations or functionality. The point of this is to really get people's idea about relationships and interconnectivity. How do people actually want to work together? How do they not want to work together? How do you use a space like a public market? Which is actually what this is. And very quickly you realize that everyone has vastly different ideas about connectivity. But this is all part of the exploration. This is all sort of games. We haven't said anything about a building yet, really. We also talk about contextual ideas. Of course, I'm showing here a site map, a little bit of a neighborhood. We don't really just talk about that. We also talk about the cultural context. What sorts of other amenities are within this radius? What are the concerns of the neighbors and neighborhood? Our site is fine and wonderful, but how do you approach it? How do people get there from the city or from the surrounding area? It's a lot of components and parameters that go into this sort of thinking. So I like to call this process, not just outside of our office, but also inside of our office, a democratic creation of content. And you're wondering what that means. What it actually means is that we have a huge amount of information that we just gained by playing all of these games. We have lots of different opinions. It's absolutely impossible for one person or one team to deal with all of this information and all of these ideas. So we hold this charrette, this all-office charrette, and we expect this is the democratic part, we expect everyone in the office, of course, assuming they have time, we expect everyone to participate and contribute their own ideas. It's not myself or anyone else walking into the office and being prescriptive about it. Everyone is communicating together. In this case, actually, it's quite often to see people gluing parts of a model or doing parts of a sketch, and while they're gluing that piece on or taping it on, someone else is taking it off or ripping it or modifying it. And at the end of this charrette, we all come back together as a large office, and every small group presents their ideas. And then it's the job of the core team for that project to sort of sift through all of those ideas and really find out what's best for the project. How can we meet the majority of the priorities and the goals that we learned about through all of the games that we played with the client and with the communities? In order to do this, though, actually student right here asked this question, one of the students asked this question a moment ago. How does your office impact this way of thinking and working? And actually, the office environment has a lot to do with it. Excuse me. So we're very careful to set up our office to support such an open dialogue so people don't feel ashamed about sharing crazy ideas. We often work around a very large table in our office that's used for eating, for meetings, for sketching together. Oftentimes more than one team is working. It sort of changes constantly throughout the day. And in this way, if you just happen to be passing by, you can throw out an idea or offer some insight. Or if you're passing by, they might actually ask you a little bit about what you're working on and about the project and contribute in that way. Of course, our studios are also open. There's no offices. The teams don't even necessarily all get to sit together. Quite often, you're sitting next to someone working on something completely different. This is somewhat intentional. Of course, it's very hard moving 60 people around all the time to work on be clustered in the same group as their project. But it's sort of intentional because we want people to be talking to each other and looking at each other's screens and learning about what they're doing. So really, up to this point, all we've done is play. We haven't really gotten to a building. We haven't gotten to an architecture or a landscape or a product. But we've gotten all of these ideas out, which is really kind of hard to do. We come up with some batshit crazy stuff. There's like some pipe cleaners, and I think those are some wood shavings or something. But the point is, actually, anything is fair game. Nothing is precious. Everyone can have a sense of authority. Not authority, authorship, which is really important to us. But what I haven't talked about yet, which is sort of where I started, actually, is the end user. What about other humans? We've talked to the client, we've talked to the stakeholders, we've talked amongst ourselves. What about the people that are actually using this space? So a huge part of our job, believe it or not, is just going out and observing. We go out and look at the people that are using the space that we're designing for. And then we ask a lot of questions. We sort of do role-playing. How can we, for example, provide a better informal meeting place for people that are trying to negotiate a deal and have that same space accommodate very large organized events? How can we make your butt comfortable and your kids safe? Are students really studying this way anymore? I don't know. This is not a Stanford library. So I don't know. Maybe this is what they look like. I haven't actually been in one. But are students really studying like this? And if they are, then why aren't they coming back anymore? Why aren't they actually here using this space? Is it possible to have a museum be more welcoming and actually change its face to an entire city or potentially the nation without taking away from or negatively impacting monumentality and iconography? Can you actually make it more accessible? Can you make art more accessible to the public? Is that possible? And how do you make streets more welcoming? This is Market Street in San Francisco. It's entirely unusable. It's brick. There's no seating. There's no level of comfort. There's actually no place to get out of the way. If you get out of the way, then you're in bike traffic. And can you make it for everyone in a cheap, supportable way? So all of these things, we've talked about games and quality, we've looked at people. The great thing about this is it really allows Snohetta to do all different types of projects. Different scales, different sizes, different typologies. Every project that we do based on our ability to impact society, to impact human connectivity and interaction. We don't choose them because we'll make enough money on them or because they seem really cool. We choose them because we can really make a very good contribution. So I've already hinted at a couple of the projects I'd like to show by asking some questions about people we see. But the projects I've chosen, I think anyways, typify not just our process. I think they typify our sense of play. I think they typify our need to reinvent space and how people are using space based on the fact that we're playing today. The last 3.8 billion years doesn't really matter anymore. What we're working on is today. So I'd like to start with a Times Square reconstruction. Some of you may or may not know anything about this project. But essentially, this is a diagram of Times Square as of about 2 or 3 years ago, actually. There's a bow tie in the middle between about 42nd and 47th Streets, which is really where all the neon is, where people go. It's tourists. It's absolutely crazy. And then around 2009, the city started looking at what happens if we actually close Broadway in this area. Is it possible to close Broadway and open up pedestrian plazas? What sort of impact will that have? So New York City actually did this. They worked with an artist who painted the street surface a different color and sort of fun blue patterns, just to test it out. And this is what happened. Pedestrian accidents decreased, revenue increased for the stores in the area, pollution decreased. There were all these wonderful positive benefits. So then that's about when we got involved. And they said, Snohetta, this is really amazing. We have all of these great results. Can we make this permanent? What does it mean to actually rethink entirely Times Square in a permanent way? We said, well, I don't know. Let's go look. We live in New York, so why would we ever go to Times Square? So then we went and looked, and we gathered a lot of information. This is something, we took some videos, and of course there's lots of videos online that we looked at. We took some videos and realized that there are a lot of measures of irritation, primarily along the edges of the buildings. Because there was no public plazas or any place to go prior to the sort of testing, everyone was crammed in these very narrow sidewalks. We looked at where people were trying to go, how they were trying to move between buildings, what was causing some of the congestion at the intersections. And we very quickly realized, quick is relative, of course. I think this was probably 1.5 years or maybe even 2 years into the project. Again, it's a public agency, so it takes a long time. My apologies if there's any public agencies in the room. We realized very quickly, actually, that all we had to do in these plazas when they became permanent was separate different types of people. And I don't mean that in any sort of discriminatory way. What I actually mean is that we had to separate people that were there to work in Times Square every day from people that were only there transiently. They were passing through Times Square, which is also different from tourists who are either there momentarily or actually setting up shop for a good bit of time so they can have lunch or they're waiting for a show or coming out of a show. So by providing some elevation in these plazas, which are shown in the middle here, already we were able to provide clear pathways for people that just wanted to get to where they were going, to get to work. There was actually a moment where you could rest and be out of traffic. And then there was still remaining room along the roadways for people that were just moving through in between things. They weren't necessarily trying to get to a building, they were just trying to move through the space. And that sort of resulted in these diagrams. I call these sort of eddies. We started using these boundaries and these perimeters to set up these conditions, to create clear paths, this sort of primary circulation, the secondary circulation, the dotted lines through the plazas, and then using boundary conditions for places for people to rest. All the while, of course, ensuring that not only did it work for informal meetings and groups, but also had enough capacity for very large formal gatherings. So the tough part here was, well, what do the boundaries want to be? Because this isn't a building. We have a couple of stairs, sure, but that's not really a boundary. And we came up with this idea of looking at how people wanted to sit and use this space and how they wanted to be. Some of those other photos I showed, for example, the group standing around the newspaper stand having a meeting. You know, is there a better spot for them? So we came up with all of these very, very long 50 to 60 feet benches that changed throughout the length so that people could sit on them, they could lay on them, they could stand on them, all of these different sort of ergonomic positions. We had no idea, by the way, whether or not this was going to work, so we had commissioned a prototype. This is actually just some foam painted with some very tough rubber. At about 2 seconds after we removed the construction tape from this is what happened. Almost instantly, someone that looks like they definitely would not want to do this jumped up on top to get a different perspective, and people were just inhabiting it almost immediately. So we knew that at least the benches were going to be very successful. And in fact, some of these benches are now installed today, and you can't actually get people off them, which is a great thing. But if you notice actually what it's doing, unfortunately, maybe these people are an exception. If you look at it, everyone is gathered around these benches, and all of a sudden it's opened up these avenues and pathways on either side where now people can actually move. People actually have some room because there's a sort of magnet point for everyone to be. Just more interesting ways people are using it. What's crazy about this is when we proposed these benches is the client was like, we can't have anyone standing on this. No one's going to stand on it. They're going to get hurt. And we were like, oh, don't worry about it. And of course, the first thing they do is stand on it. So, and even the naked cowboy actually sang a little song about Snohetta for us on the benches, which is sort of fun. You can see it's actually still under construction. I think that's a construction hat he's wearing. Maybe one last note on the project. This isn't necessarily human focused, right? But it's still, I think, a very important component of the project because while the benches are nice, we have these massive plazas to deal with. And we wanted to create something special, but at the same time didn't actually compete with Times Square. How can you compete with Times Square? It's like how many millions of amps and volts and all these other electrical terminology things are moving through these. It's impossible. So what we came up with actually was something very passive, just these little metal discs that would be embedded in the paving that would actually then pick up the light from the signs and actually sort of guide you in a certain way through the plazas. Promote some directionality, also a little fine-grained detail. Just something interesting. It's like I said, it's not really human-focused, but I think actually a very important component of the project overall. It's still under construction. This photo is now actually quite old, but I wanted to at least share a few renderings and images of what it will look like when it's complete. So this is under construction. This is sort of the larger plan. You can see some of the perimeter benches on down through the plazas. Of course, there's still movable seating. The movable seating is, of course, because there's over 640 planned events or something in Times Square every year. And this is just sort of finished renderings, gratuitous photos. Or renderings, sorry, not photos. Second project I'd like to talk about is, in fact, the Ryerson University Student Learning Center. It's a real fancy name for a library extension. Some of the images I showed earlier also of students either not inhabiting or not using the library was really a result of the old library was very prescriptive, actually. It sort of wanted to define how students were using it. Students either had to use how it was being defined or they just didn't use it. So we thought for a little while and we said, well, let's make something versatile. That's a great idea. It'll be open and people can do everything they want. And we thought, well, actually, no, that's not that interesting either because it's still all of the same type of space if you make something flexible. If everything is flexible, then nothing is flexible because it's all the same. Nothing changes. Nothing's different. So we came up with this, I don't know why it says interpretive, but we came up with this idea, actually, that just by providing a little bit of section and providing a little bit of color and varying, say, the furnishings and fixtures on each floor, you can make each floor of this very different and accommodate all different types of uses. So we came up with these sort of funny pet names just as a guiding concept for the project to really drive home the idea as we were designing that this had to be different. Students weren't going to use it if we prescribed in only one way how the space was used. So we came up with all of these different things. This one is called the Valley. It's actually the main entry. And it's a large open space, and students use it in all kinds of ways. There's a space for gathering and to make noise and be loud. There's also a space for people to step off the path and wait for their friends, work on some studies. This is the garden. It has sort of informal seating grouped together that students can reconfigure and push around and use and move. This is, I think, called the sunroom. And you'll see that this actually is more formal space, but it's still open. There's a lot of light. Students actually feel warm and welcome to work here rather than being shoved up against an elevator core. Of course, you'll notice also that there's no books in this part of the library. In fact, this space, which is called the Bluff, is all about technology. All of the books stayed in the old library, and this really just expanded the space. Of course, students still use the books. I don't mean to imply that they don't. But what they didn't have was actually a space where they could come together and do research, study, or even socialize for that matter. This floor here, called the beach, is probably my favorite and also the most interesting floor. It's really incredibly open. It's, in fact, it's the most reconfigurable space the students have, and they absolutely love it. There's actually a group of students that have started every Tuesday. They go down lower on the water. The water is the blue carpet. Study, do work together, share ideas, and then they head up the steps and they start breakdancing right in the middle of the library. That's them on the far left. Of course, other students use it in lots of different ways, and this is where we get a lot of our information also post-occupancy. Just looking at Instagram, by the way, most of these next few photos are just from Instagram. People are also using it as informal picnic space and meeting space. They could very well be doing work and studying. I don't know, that's not really the point, but they can actually get together and feel comfortable. Other people choose just to sleep, and other people take off their parka and just try and get a tan in the winter. So how do we know if our building is successful or not, or our project for that matter? It doesn't have to be a building. We've started doing research in-house. So we go back, we interview students in this case, or whoever is using the space, and we try and ask some questions and get information. We put out surveys. Of course, we also do observations. And this is the great thing about this building. People like it for very different reasons, which is exactly what we were hoping to accomplish. And we know which floor that people use the most. So this is where play, in a way, from our perspective, from our process perspective, can become a little bit more formalized. Now we have information. We know what students like. We know, for example, which floor they're going to study the most on. We know which floor they're going to socialize the most on. So we can draw parallels to other projects that we're doing to help promote these sort of conditions and uses. This is sort of the ultimate gauge of whether or not this is successful. By the way, that's the previous library which we're connected to. You can sort of probably tell why students did not use it that often. We found that students on average are using it 5.5 hours more now than before the university, the Learning Center opened, which is pretty incredible. It's a lot of time. That's almost a full day. The next few photos are maybe a bit more pretty images than anything. But it's still interesting to see, even on the outside, you can tell that the floors are different. You know, that building indicates to you that each floor has a different use, that you can sort of find what works for you in that moment, in that time. As well as, of course, the outside of the building needs to be welcoming and make you feel comfortable. I think someone told me the other day that it's not a Snohetta lecture unless there's naked people at some point. So this is what makes it Snohetta. But actually, the amazing thing about these buildings, even from an exterior perspective, is you still need to make it welcoming. If people don't feel comfortable approaching a building and engaging with the building, they're never going to come inside to find out what it's all about, really. So here, the valley extends to the outside, and you have one of the breakdancers. This is one of the people we interviewed, actually, using the outside space for more of a sort of parkour activity. And then as they go inside and study, of course, it transforms more into breakdance. This is just an image I like. Of course, all of our buildings, when we think about users, The users are people that actually maintain the buildings, or the people that work inside the buildings. So anything and everything we do, we try and think about how can we enrich these people's lives, and how can we actually make things a little bit better for them. Hopefully this guy thinks that's a good position to be in. Hopefully he's not afraid of heights. Finally, second to last project I'd like to share is MoMA. I'm sure all of you are anticipating the opening on May 14th, very, very soon. I think for those of you that have memberships, you might even be able to get in a little bit earlier. I know I hope to. This one is near and dear to all of us. Obviously, it's in San Francisco. This is the first museum that Snohetta has done, certainly on this scale. Of course, we've done some gallery spaces and exhibition spaces, but this is really the first giant project. And it's a very tough one because, of course, we're trying to be a companion and friendly partner to the existing Mario Bota project. It's also actually going to be positioned in one of the busiest neighborhoods in the city once Trans Bay opens. And we're dealing with this tiny slivered, narrow site behind the project. So we don't want to detract from the project, detract from Mario Bota's building, but we want to make it more welcoming and inviting. We want it to be publicly accessible. It's on a tiny sliver of a site, and all of a sudden you have like millions more people in the neighborhood than ever. So what do? So we came up with an idea that, well, if we lift the building off of the ground, then people will feel more welcome because there's no obstructions. There's no barriers for them to walk into the site. So the first thing we did was essentially eliminate the bottom 25 feet of the building. The second thing we did was realize that, well, that's nice. That gives you space, but how do you make it welcoming and light? So we made the building as narrow as possible and sort of sucked in the belly as much as we could, and made the program as efficient as possible on the inside. And it started creating these rather nice spaces. All of a sudden, there was space to put art outdoors. There were little plazas and parks which people could come and engage in and be a part of. As well as by lifting the building off the ground, the Bota project is here to the left. Our project is here to the right. By lifting the building off the ground, we were actually able to get this incredible connectivity on the inside of the building between the projects. They were now inherently linked from an experiential perspective. This created a unified ground and second floor that everyone is free to move on. This is entirely public. This is all before ticketing. All of a sudden, we just more than doubled art that would be publicly accessible without paying. Pretty incredible opportunity and moment. Unfortunately, in order to do that, we did have to knock down the very iconic stair in Bota's project. But now, while other people found that maybe a little formal, this is much more inviting. You can actually see through the green wall, the green patch there is actually the other side of our building. You're actually looking all the way through our building. And that draws you up through the space. At the top of those stairs is the art court. This is where the ticketing is, but now, of course, you have a relationship to the exterior also. Before, once you were inside Bota, it was only inside of the museum. You had no orientation or relationship to the city, to the neighborhood, and now we're sort of reconnecting you to that. And if you turn to the right in that image, you can see this is the Howard Street Gallery. So just on the other side of course, typically very large Richard Serra sculpture is the street. And that's 25-foot floor-to-ceiling glass that's completely transparent. So now, just as you're walking by the street, whether you like it or not, you're engaged with art. And of course, if you would like, you can actually enter into the project and see it and be a part of it. Of course, what this did by lifting up the building and by creating what we call this sort of pregnant form, by making and shrinking the facade as much as possible, it created a very large mass that we now had to deal with that didn't have any relationship to the city or to human movement or to connectivity. So we started chopping it up into small sections of floors and came up with the idea that the galleries could be as simple as possible and efficient as possible. So we just started rectangles. That's more or less what curators generally want. Rectangles that are subdividable and they can break up and can be modified for each exhibition. But what that gave us was an incredible remainder of space, which is this entire green area, which will be used for art. There's going to be primarily sculpture in there. It's a little bit more, it has to be sculpture and less painting, for example, or drawings, only because of natural light conditions. But all of a sudden, the entire side of the building had this incredible opportunity to promote movement and physical movement. It's actually one of the most, it ended up in my mind being the most exciting part of the project, where all of these stairs give you varying viewpoints throughout the project and connection to art in different levels. You see people walking by, you have a relationship to the city, to the outside, which is really amazing. This is a little bit older sketch, but in that space, in order to reconnect you to the city and give you that idea, we wanted to create these outdoor terraces. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of or maybe even experienced gallery fatigue, where when you're in a building that has over 400,000 square feet of art, you actually kind of get a little tired of looking at it. It's not that you don't like it or don't want to, it's just a lot to process, right? Art is sort of an emotional connection. It's a lot to take in and understand. So we wanted to give you a reprieve off of these paths and started to create these terraces here. So before I move on, for example, that's exactly what the existing sculpture garden did, which is being maintained, by the way. And now all of a sudden you had a moment to get off that path, to rest, to think about what you just saw, to sort of refresh, regain some fresh air and natural light before moving on. And again, similar to the little metal pucks I showed with Times Square, there is at some point a part of the project where you don't necessarily have to deal with humans, although you can deal with emotion and sort of delight and beautiful imagery. Is once we did all of these moves, created public areas, connection to the city, outdoor plazas, we realized that we still had a very giant blank facade along this face. And we started looking at the context around the city and started thinking about water and the way light plays off it and shadows. We started thinking about art pieces at the museum owned. For example, the Florence Lipsky piece, which provided commentary on the city grid and the topography. And started seeing a lot of things that we really liked. And something that we felt that put on a surface of a building when thinking about daylight and how the sun was moving would be really successful. We didn't really know how to do that, so this is when the play comes back in. We just started making stuff. We didn't know what we were making. We knew approximately the form of the building, but we were trying out different techniques. Some people were 3D printing, some people were polishing wood or taking plaster molds. Some people were taking foam. This model actually, this beautiful texture just resulted from spray paint dissolving the foam. It's probably toxic, but you know, it's all for the sake of great architecture, I guess. So, but what we arrived at, just accidentally, were two models that really started to talk about what we were looking for, that could really have a play on light. This one on the left was just corrugated cardboard. They didn't intend to have this texture or that look. It's just sort of the result of the material. And the one on the right was just someone made a paper mold. All the little ripples in the surface was just because it was kind of a bad mold. But it was actually exactly what we were looking for. So we thought, well, how can we scale this up? And we started making bigger models, running through different techniques of building, and things started to emerge that we really liked. And we still didn't know how to build it, but we started testing it, at least manually, in the computer, and looking at different light and shadow conditions using the coordinates of the building so we could actually really know what this might look like. And as we refined the geometry, we thought, well, what do we make this out of? We have no idea. At first, we thought about stone. It's a beautiful material. And then we quickly realized that that was the entire budget of the project. We don't want to give people like Norm a heart attack. We realized it was the entire budget of the project, and it was really heavy, which of course was contributing to its cost, because then the structure went up. So we had no idea. We were like, wow, we know exactly what we want now, but we have no idea how to build it. Then we met this guy. There's an absolute genius named Bill Chrysler who has a shop up in American Canyon who makes the P.F. Chang's horses out of a material called FRP, fiber reinforced polymer. And he was in our office. I can't even remember why, to be honest. This was many years ago now. And he said, "Oh, I can do that. That's not a problem." And we were like, "Really? You make horses?" But we trusted him, and it was absolutely, we trusted him, and he said, "No, just give me a couple of weeks. I'll come back and show you something." And he showed up in our office essentially with this. Now, all of these didn't come at the exact same time. A couple of them came, and then a couple of more came. And he said, "This is what I can do with this material." He said, "Sure, I make beautiful horses, but actually, the only reason I can do that is because I have the technique and the ability to make basically anything I want in a very cheap way out of this FRP material." So he said, "Bill, you are a genius. We'll give it to you." And we started working with him and refining in larger and larger scales through this process about what this material would be. At first we said, "We want it white." And he said, "No, you don't really want it white." And he said, "No, we want it really, really white." So he gave us white, actually, and we thought, "Whoa, that's way too white. We can't do it. That's actually this one here." We said, "No, we don't actually want white." And he said, "Well, I told you." So this, ultimately, this was one of the final test panels that he provided for us before it went on the building, which was really amazing. This process, by the way, obviously, you can't really draw this in 2D. So this is straight from digital model to fabrication. There were shop drawings, of course, for waterproofing and connection details, but this actual surface was straight to fabrication. So now here's the beautiful pictures. This is actually a rendering. And actually, this is the fun part because I'm going to show renderings and then I'll show photos, some of which I'm not actually allowed to show. So is anyone here from MoMA before I go forward? Okay, good. So this is a rendering. This is now a couple of months ago. Obviously, the cranes are long gone. But it's kind of cool. It's pretty close. You can actually even identify some of the same ripples. If you look in this corner here, for example, you can see the same sort of thing. So it was built, because it was straight digital to fabrication, it's actually exactly what we expected. And the result was just amazing. I probably should have put the photo of water next to this one, for example. But okay, so you can't inhabit this facade per se, right? But it does still have some human qualitative aspects to it. It still is evocative of emotion. It actually makes you want to be in the building and be around the building. Similarly, on the left is a rendering of the plaza. On the right is a photo, now also a couple of months ago. I don't dare show any recent photos. Howard Street Gallery, you already saw that image, and that's after Sarah was installed. Our gallery. Oh, this is really cool. So this is that interstitial space, right? This is the stairway where you get all these different viewpoints. And if you go from this image to this image, it's pretty interesting. Actually, the layering of light here is really interesting because, of course, on the far left, that's where humans would typically want to be, and on the far right, that's where art would typically want to be because it's a controlled environment. So this interstitial space is actually acting as a transition. Last couple of photos. Pretty cool. Okay, this project is really, really quick, and then I promise I'll be quiet and sit down. This is really fun. This project really was entirely about play. It had nothing to do with anything else. We had so much fun in our office doing it. Everyone in San Francisco worked on this project, built part of this project. Literally, you'll see in a moment. Did any of you go to the Market Street Prototyping Festival last year? It's possible. There were a couple. It's where the city and Yerba Buena Center for the Arts actually invited about 50 designers, not just architects, artists, and engineers, and all kinds of people, Autodesk even, to come in and propose temporary weekend installations on Market Street that would improve the streetscape and actually make it inhabitable. I would argue actually make it bearable, but really they wanted to make it habitable. And we started this process just like we do any other, which is we all got together in a charrette and we came up with some really crazy ideas, really fun ideas. One was to make this giant spiral slide. Another was basically to build your grandmother's living room right in the middle with wallpaper and sort of old fixtures. Another was actually to build more or less a lifeguard station at the top of one of the lampposts, and you could have dinner around the city street lamps, which is pretty cool. And then we were like, oh, actually, wait a minute, we have a $2,000 budget. We can't do any of this. So then we thought, okay, well, how can we really make an impact on the street? If you think about all of those images before, there's just nothing there. Everything is brick. It's all hard. So you don't want to actually sit on the sidewalk. It's not comfortable to. It's not clean or safe. So we thought, well, what we really need is an elevated surface or an elevated platform that will make people actually want to stop and stay there. Another thing we need is a little bit of motion. If it's just static, people will just sort of ignore it, right? But if they see that something's moving, they'll be drawn to it and they'll want to be a part of it. It's sort of like if you walk up to a swing, you kind of just want to jump on. It doesn't matter what age you are. Or you want to, I don't know. I ran out of good ideas there. I'll move on. The other part of it is, well, we wanted something soft. And we were like, great, we have landscape architects in-house. This is wonderful. So we thought, what if we just made it a park space where you could have a little picnic, sort of roll around in the grass? Don't see that on Market Street every day. So we started putting together these prototypes after a long time. The one on the upper left was just to test the curvature and sort of play with it in our office, make sure it didn't crush any toes. Kind of ugly, not very good actually. And then the one on the bottom right is the next iteration of it, where we started actually thinking about structure. We started thinking about, well, how tall can this actually be where someone can get their foot up on it, regardless of age or ability or capacity? How much and how can we prevent it actually rocking so it doesn't hurt someone's feet or toes? How does it actually get held together, and how do we install it in less than 8 hours time or whatever time it was, and then remove it in even less time than that? So we started working out all the details and the nitty-gritty, and we also thought, well, where do we get sod? And how do we get sod? And we thought, well, hey, this is a great idea. Let's grow it in our office. So I'll show you. So things started coming together, and we thought, well, is this really going to work? And then we came in one day, and we were like, yeah, this is going to work, because people in our office couldn't help but play on it and jump and have fun. Sorry, Max. This is maybe a little out of order. But we worked with Habitat Horticulture, which was one of our consultants for SF MoMA, for the Green Wall, actually, to grow an 8-foot by 12-foot patch of grass and flowers on a 1/4-inch thick piece of felt in our office with a grow light over a month's time. It actually worked. And this is the final result. You can see it. It was actually what I would consider quite successful, not because people are using it, but because people are using it in different ways, and they're comfortable using it. There's people doing yoga, someone actually doing work, kids trying to destroy it, which I think is actually the most fun. I was really happy, actually, to see them try such things. So anyways, this is basically where I want to end. Hopefully it was somewhat coherent. But what I really do believe, actually, that being a part of that moment in time, where all we have to do is play, is of course very challenging, but it's play. It's also the most fun. And I think that Snohetta is doing as best we can to make sure that it's positive and creates connections and actually advances how we treat each other and work with each other and talk to each other and improves our relationships. So I'll leave you with that. sorry, is it Q&A? Anyone but, no. Yes, Norm.
That was a great talk, dude. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You did an interesting thing several times. You stepped out of the human perspective and commented on the human perspective.
Yeah.
In regard to the coins embedded in the pavement in Times Square, you said that they serve no human purpose, but they're important nonetheless.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered if you could speak for just a moment more on what is an important non-human perspective.
Sorry, important non-human perspective? I don't know if I'm going to be able to answer that on short notice. I'll call you tomorrow if I mess this up. No, I think actually one of the things that we do is create and design a framework for interaction. And sometimes we deal with things that directly involve a physicality or an ergonomics, the benches, for example. And other times, we just have to create an environment or a framework for such things to happen. And in order to do that, in order to actually get people to do something, you have to do something. So if, for example, those pucks weren't there and the paving pattern wasn't there, let's just say it was a black surface. We just painted something, right? That's not provocative or evocative. It doesn't actually draw people to the space. So I think from an inhuman perspective, isn't to say that humans aren't involved. It's just that we don't have to directly engage in every element and component of it. That may not answer your question, but yeah.
In the MoMA project, the long facade has the ripple FRP dance, but when you turn the corner, the ripples aren't there. Why didn't you continue them around the corner?
That's a very good question. You know, if I showed you the number of studies that we did on that in the office, you'd probably say, "Well, you guys wasted a lot of time debating that." It's actually quite simple. What we realized was that sometimes too much of a good thing is bad. So we thought that facade really, more than anything, is where something like that can have the most impact. It also will change the most throughout the day because it's east-facing. So in the morning, it gets direct sunlight. There's almost no shadows. It actually flattens out that surface. And as the sun moves up and over, of course, also depending on the seasons, the shadows change. And then by the afternoon, it, of course, is in complete shadow, which has a similar effect to being in complete sunlight, right? Everything sort of flattens out. If you do that on the south, it's actually not quite that impactful. It changes, of course, but it's really not enough to really have an impact. So we decided, let's just make it smooth and just keep it at that.
I thought the student space, you know, that you showed us was really interesting in terms of kind of breaking up the normal floors and combining different levels. And I noticed that when Charles Wentro was here a few months ago, he showed us a building that had some similarities. And I'm wondering if that's the state of modern architecture or if something about students or human beings, you know, as a whole, has, you know, we've evolved to the point where we want a space like that, whether you explore those ideas.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's necessarily the state of architecture. I think, though, it is the state of how students are actually working and being. If, for example, we proposed a modernist building, it wouldn't really be used by students. So, at least from my perspective, what I hope is that the architecture is a result of how students and humans are actually using it, rather than students using it as a result of the architecture. I don't know. It's a subtle difference there. So I'm hoping what you see is more emergent than prescriptive, and it's not actually surprising then that there would be similarities across different designers. Sure. Yes.
When I first saw your drawings or models of the MoMA, I was kind of blown away that you guys took out, you know, lotus and stairwell. And now seeing it and hearing your explanation, it just makes total sense.
Mm-hmm.
But yet I can't imagine that you didn't give some resistance with MoMA or what are
That's a good question, because that was equally, as you can imagine, an extended debate. Part of the reason it was removed, by the way, is because of the connectivity of the buildings and the increase in capacity. Those stairs actually didn't meet code anymore. So if we didn't remove them, we were going to have to put, I can't remember how many other stairwells throughout the building, which would actually add another floor because all the stairwells would chew into the space. You know, that's sort of a code reasoning. But if you look at it again back to the human perspective and wanting to positively impact the city of San Francisco, I think what we were trying to do while being respectful of BOTA was just create a space that actually indicated the changing times and how people are going to be using and approaching the building. BOTA actually did it. It's an amazing project. We love the building. I know Mario has spoken with Craig and one of the partners in my office and others, and we've talked about the project. It's great. He had no input. He basically just said, "I know you guys will do good work. Don't worry about it." But it was a really big challenge because we wanted to be we like the building. We wanted to be respectful of it. It's very formal. It's at, MoMA. When people think of MoMA, they think of that building. So we didn't want to damage it or denigrate it in any way at all. We actually wanted to support it and improve it, and that was one way that we had hoped to do that. I think when you're in it, you'll still agree that it's a pretty fantastic space. It's full of light. One delightful side effect of removing that stair, by the way, is the previous stair was, of course, in the oculus above, right? And now there's nothing obstructing natural light from the skylight above coming in. So it's actually a much lighter space also. Sure. I saw you first, and then I saw that.
The AIA has a sort of rule of thumb about the percentage of your fee spent in schematics, design development, construction,
I have a feeling I'm not going to be allowed to answer this. I don't think I can answer that. We do, of course. It's not that we. I think I'll just leave it at that. Yes. Yeah. Sorry, you. Yeah.
You seem to do real well at having fun.
Uh huh.
If you're looking to hire people and you go to architecture schools, do you have to teach this to people
I don't think generally we have to teach it to people. On that note, on fun, actually, believe it or not, the process that we use is actually much more difficult and challenging than it is to just have someone like myself or others come in with a sketch and say, "This is what you do, make it look like this." It's actually much more challenging. It's a lot about communication and discussion and dialogue, and really trying to do what's best for the project and sort of get rid of ego. So thinking about students, of course, it really just depends on the person. If it's someone that we feel like we have to train, although we don't train any, but a lot of my colleagues are sitting here. None of you are trained, right? If we have to train you, to be honest, we're probably not going to hire you, because it's very hard to get over oneself, when something is inherent and embedded in them. So when we look for students, this also was asked in your class earlier. When we look for students, by the time we look at your portfolio, if we give you a call, actually you're on a fairly level playing field. From then on, it's really about attitude and approach and personality to us, which is very, very important.
Do the people you hire just sort of, do they come with it to begin with, or do they pick it up in the office?
It depends. Everyone's different. Everyone, I think on day one anyways, if someone starts booing at me or something, I'll know. I think actually on day one, everyone gets it. And as you get to know people, like I said in the very beginning of my discussion, we're at a point where work, life, and play are all one. right? And now arguably even the proportion of play is increasing, even though those three things are still together. I think on day one everyone gets it, and then part of it is establishing relationships and friendships. Not that we're all best friends and go out partying and drinking every weekend, although sometimes we do. But it actually makes it easier then to have fun together working, especially when things get hard and tough, busy. Yes?
I have a question about how you can keep your workflow, especially like the digital workflow, in a very high proficient direction. Like the facade, the MoMA is very complex, so you need to make a digital model, and you need to like parametric 3D design, and the Rader model and the shape drawing, and you need to change the design. And how you can keep this kind of digital design in a very high proficient way?
Highly efficient. I don't know if everyone heard that. The question was about how do we keep workflow efficient. The example of the SF MoMA facade was used in which it's sort of highly tuned, especially digitally. And one of the cool things, one of the ways we keep work fun actually is early on in the process, we don't really jump into, say, Grasshopper, which is what was used for MoMA, which is probably what you're asking about. We often go between physical and digital. We're careful that nothing is too precious in the computer. Any of the models that we do in the computer, we use it more like clay, actually, than we do documentation, especially early on. And it's not really until later in the process when we really know what we want and what we're looking for that's when it gets harder and harder to change in the computer. By then, the only drastic change would be if there's a change in budget or the build, a significant reason. But early on, it's actually mostly hand and digital, but in a clay sense, not in a documentation sense. Yeah, I saw you first, and then.
Just out of curiosity, did you have to do any compromises in your design to bring it back into budget?
Which design? Anyone?
Sorry.
Doesn't matter. For MoMA? Yeah. Next question. No, but so let me also provide an anecdote actually, which isn't MoMA. I think believe it or not, what we find when we in our projects when we approach a value engineering situation is that quite often, believe it or not, it actually improves the project because it forces us to go back and really think about what is important, where can we gain the most value. It's not like we're saying, okay, everything is gold-plated and we're being frivolous. We're never that way. But there are, of course, some things that we would like to have. And until we're sort of forced to really value engineer, sometimes we don't know what we like to have versus what we need to have, from a design impact perspective. A good example, actually, is the Hunt Library in North Carolina, which I think was mentioned in my introduction. We were at the end of schematic design, actually, and 2008 hit. We all know what happened then. And the project was essentially immovable. It was state-funded, bonded, public university, and that sort of thing. So the project wasn't dying, but they said we had to lose $10 million on at the time, $85 million building, which is a pretty big chunk. That's more than 10% at the end of schematic design. And actually, what we ended up having to do was take what's called the ASRS, Automated Storage Retrieval System, the robotic system with the books, bury it underground, and that allowed us to take an entire floor off the top of the building. And believe it or not, actually, the building was significantly improved. The proportions were better, the circulation worked better. It was a much more interesting space. Anyways, that's a very verbose way of saying value engineering can actually be good. Sorry, I saw you, but he was.
Some of the other projects you're bringing to the table,
To the Bay Area. Let's see, French Laundry, which is good. Yeah, good, of course. We're working on a 40-story condominium tower called One Oak, right on Mission in Van Ness. which, by the way, part of that is a public plaza. We're proposing to close a portion of Oak Street where it meets Van Ness, which will be quite nice. We finished design work last year on a renovation of Terminal 1 at SFO, which is now under construction. The cool thing about that actually is it's temporary, so we know it's going to get torn down in 5 or 6 years, which we haven't really done before. But the cool thing about that is SFO loosened their standards, knowing that if they didn't like it, it was just going away. In the end, ultimately, it sort of ended up being a paint and carpet job, but I think we actually did quite a lot with paint and carpet. I don't know. We'll see when it opens. Another thing, we are working on one place with a developer in Pacific Heights, which I can't really say too much on, but it's a renovation for a developer. That's it right now. Other projects on the West Coast, though, actually, there's an exhibition on Snohetta, which we've been working very hard on in Portland. Not Bay Area, obviously, West Coast, which opens up next weekend. We're working on the James Beard Public Market, also in Portland. Willamette Falls River Walk, outside of Portland. There's some other things which I probably can't say too much about. But yes, I saw you too. Sorry. Go ahead.
How do you get new work?
I don't know. Do you know of anyone that wants to give us any more? It's changing. No, it's changing actually, especially in the U.S. as we've grown. When I started with the company many years ago, no one knew who we were, nor did they really care to know who we were. But since then, of course, like once the National Opera opened and the Museum Pavilion at World Trade Center became known, people were returning our calls or inquiries. Now it's slowly shifting, actually, where we generally only respond to RFQs or RFPs if we know that we're on the short list already or something like that. We don't really do competitions unless it's super high profile. We just submitted, actually, the design competition for the Obama Presidential Library about a month ago. We're one of 7 in Chicago. That's a rare occasion where we said, okay, it's probably worth doing a design for. But it's changing from chasing after everything and slowly people at least letting us know about projects first. Sorry, now you.
Out of the 3-4 projects that you've shown us, is there anything that you would have done differently in hindsight?
In hindsight? The Market Street prototyping, I would have found a more durable grass. It kind of turned to mud. Not off the top of my head, no. In fact, there's sometimes things happen and you're like, wow, I was wrong. I'm glad the team overruled me. The Times Square project, actually, I was against the little metal pucks in the plaza when it was a debate. I wasn't on the team, so my opinion didn't actually matter. But when they asked my opinion, I told them. And I was very wrong about that. So it's good that we have this democratic sort of approach. Protect us from ourselves. One more question, I'm told. I don't, you want to pick? Oh, damn. I saw you back there.
You talk about play a lot, and then sometimes you play with your clients. I'm wondering, what's your approach in terms of dealing with clients?
I'm sorry, the sneeze. I missed your last couple of... What was the last part of your question?
What's your approach in terms of dealing with clients?
Approach of dealing with clients. I think we approach them without any preconceived notions or preconceptions. I think we try and go. None of this process stuff matters if you go with them and say, okay, I have all of these ideas, right? So I think our approach with clients is to go in and listen. We talk a lot before we put pencils to paper or glue to cardboard or whatever we put glue to. I think we just try and understand really what their ambitions are and what their needs are first. I think that's our approach. And then, of course, it's not that we disappear for a while, but at some point you have to retreat to the back cave and do some work and then come back. And when you show them stuff, it's very important, I think, not to be defensive, but to be open to ideas and critique. So I think we just try and try and promote a dialogue as best we can, more than anything.
Do you ever bring the clients into the office when you do those studies?
Never. No. Yeah. Clients are welcome in our office anytime, without they don't have to let us know. Everyone's always welcome. All of you are always welcome. Although I don't think all of you would fit in our San Francisco office.
But it's really great when you're right in the middle of doing the study and all these ideas are coming out.
Yeah, it depends actually. Sometimes, of course, it also depends on the client and depends on the situation. Sometimes it's helpful because you could waste 2 weeks going down a path that they don't like. Other times, of course, as you know, probably, it can be disruptive also because you don't have something. It's not that everything has to be polished. In fact, it's better if it's not polished, because if you present something that's polished and there's a negative reaction or some feedback, it's very hard to change, right? You get attached to it. Sometimes, though, if it's not polished enough for presentation to really get across the idea, then it can be a problem, because then you just eliminated an approach which was maybe could have been good. So it's a fine balance. But if a client shows up at our door and knocks, I'm not going to go look around like that. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, come back later. Great, thanks.